January 30, 1948, 3 bullets were fired at point-blank range. 2 words were heard as the lifeless body collapsed on the lawns of Birla House in New Delhi.
Hey Ram. This was the tragic end for the illustrious son of India, the one who had done more than all else to free India from the shackles of British subjugation. Another illustrious son of India, the one who had done more than all else to gain recognition for India on the intellectual stage of the world, had ended his conscious moments by dictating these words.
O deceitful one, in simple life, you have craftily scattered the snares of false faith. One who endures your deception without effort is rewarded by you with the right to eternal peace.
In their last moments, one remembered his God with reverence, and the other called his God deceitful and staked his claim on eternal peace as reward from his deceitful muse. Friends, our parents and their parents grew up under the shadows of these 2 great sons of India, one a prophet and the other a poet. My friends and I must get to know them afresh. To my right is Sanjeev Iyer, who's exploring more about the life and work of Mahatma Gandhi. And Abhijit Ganguly to my left is studying about Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. My name is Aparna Nori and I'm joining them in their discoveries. To start with, one was from the western flank of India, Gujarat, and the other was from across the subcontinent to the east, Bengal. One called the other Mahatma and the other addressed the first as Gurudev. They admired and revered each other as few friends do. They differed with each other as few adversaries do. They met for the first time in 1915 when half their life had been spent when both were acknowledged icons held in high esteem not only in India but in the global arena. It may be interesting to know if they have any recollection of their first meeting. Let us begin with the Mahatma. Does he remember his first meeting with Gurudev?
I'm not quite sure. The year could have been 1901 when I had come to Calcutta from South Africa to attend the meeting of the Indian National Congress. I was to present the case of the 100,000 British Indians in South Africa.
What about Rabindranath Tagore?
Even I'm not quite sure about the meeting, although I was a member of the reception committee of the Congress at the time.
In the year 1901, Tagore was 40 years old and Gandhi was 32. Neither had attained a stature that extended much beyond their primary spheres of activity. That was Bengali literature for Tagore. For Gandhi, it was representing the oppressed, British Indians in South Africa. In December 1913, 2 friends of Tagore, Charlie Andrews and Willie Pearson, left for South Africa to advance the cause of Gandhi there. 2 days before their departure, a meeting was organized by Tagore and others in the town hall of Kolkata to consider the position of Indians in South Africa. Charlie Andrews immediately sensed resonant wavelengths between the two. He wrote to Tagore in January 1914, "I had no difficulty seeing from the first Mr. Gandhi's position and accepting it, for in principle it is essentially the same as yours. A true independence, a reliance upon spiritual force, a fearless courage in the face of temporal power, and withal a deep and burning charity for all men. An apt assessment of the character of two noble souls." When Gandhi decided to disband his Phoenix ashram in South Africa and return to India, it was Andrews who suggested that the residents of Phoenix ashram stay at Gurudev's Shantiniketan before Gandhi could make alternate arrangements for them. The boys from Phoenix arrived at Shantiniketan in November 1914. Soon after their arrival,
I wrote to Charlie Andrews, "The Phoenix boys have discipline where they should have ideals. They're trained to obey, for obedience is good not because it is good in itself, but because it is a sacrifice. These boys are in danger of forgetting to wish for anything, and wishing is the best part of attainment." However, a few days later, I wrote to Mahatma Ji, "Dear Mr. Gandhi, I write this letter to thank you for allowing your boys to become our boys as well, and thus form a living link in the sadhana of both of our lives. Very sincerely, yours."
indeed, this prophetic living link laid a foundation for a relationship that was unique and lifelong. The two met for the first time in March 1915. As a commemoration, March 10th is observed as Gandhi Punya Divas in Shantiniketan even today. Both of them loved India and deeply respected her heritage. Both were pained to the core at the conduct of British in India. Both sought genuine freedom, Swaraj. But the path sought by one differed from that of the other. One sought political freedom as an end. For the other, it was a means of awakening the inner soul. As early as 1918, Gandhi wanted Hindi to be the national language.
Dear Gurudev, is not Hindi the only possible national language for interprovincial intercourse and for all other national proceedings? Should not Hindi be the language principally used at the forthcoming Congress? I believe that if you are to touch the masses and if national servants are to come in contact with the masses all over India, the above questions ought to be treated as of the utmost urgency. I am yours sincerely.
Dear Mr. Gandhi, of course Hindi is a possible national language for interprovincial intercourse in India. But about its introduction at the Congress, I think we cannot enforce it for a long time to come. It is truly a foreign language for the Madras people. Most of the politicians will find it difficult to express themselves adequately in this language. So Hindi will have to remain optional in our national proceedings. Yours, very sincerely.
The strain of differences had started to tell. Agreement on the malady, disagreement on the remedy, accord on the ends, and discord on the means. In 1920, Gandhi invited Tagore to Ahmedabad to attend the 6th Gujarati Sahitya Parishad.
Dear Gurudev, we are all deeply grateful to you for your acceptance of the invitation. Every effort is being made not to overload you with engagements or tamashas. Will you please let me know, if necessary by wire, how long you will be able to give Gujarat and whether you would be able to visit one or two important centers? The second question is regarding your residence. Would you put up at the ashram? I am most anxious that you should give the benefit of your presence to many at the ashram who claim to have been your pupils. It is on the banks of the Sabarmati. You could stay at the ashram or at a private bungalow in Ahmedabad with all the appointments. Do please also let me know of any special arrangements or things you will desire. Yours sincerely.
I stayed with Ambalal Sarabhai, but I did visit the ashram. What a memorable welcome I had.
I believe it was our duty to give you a fitting welcome. I do not think the students lost anything in being busy with this work. They were merely following the duty of service. Moreover, Gurudev is an exceptional man. He has poetry, goodness and patriotism about him. This is a rare mixture. He deserves to be honored.
Mahatma Ji, I also remember that meeting where the audience requested a Gujarati translation of my extempore speech. All the stalwarts of Gujarati literature present there expressed their inability to do so. You came along and gave the audience a Gujarati version right away.
Gandhi had advocated boycott of British educational institutions. He had prescribed satyagraha, charkha and Swaraj as the trident of his freedom movement. Tagore objected to each one of these either in letters to friends or in articles published. Gandhi defended his position firmly through the same media. The debate between them was on political issues but was elevated to a philosophical plane.
Dear Mahatma Ji, passive resistance is a force which is not necessarily moral in itself. It can be used against truth as well as for it. The danger inherent in all force grows stronger when it is likely to gain success, for then it becomes temptation. I know your teaching is to fight against evil by the help of the good, but such a fight is for heroes and not for men led by impulses of the moment. Yours, etc.
2 years later, Tagore wrote in an article, Brahma Vidya in India has for its object mukti, emancipation, while Buddhism has nirvana, extinction. It may be argued that both have the same idea by different names, but names represent attitudes of mind, emphasize particular aspects of truth.
Mukti draws our attention to the positive and nirvana to the negative side of truth.
In my humble opinion, rejection is as much an ideal as the acceptance of a thing. It is as necessary to reject untruth as it is to accept truth. All religions teach that two opposite forces act upon us and that the human endeavor consists of a series of eternal rejections and acceptances. Non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as cooperation with good. I venture to suggest that the poet has done an unconscious injustice to Buddhism in describing nirvana as merely a negative state. I make bold to say that mukti, emancipation, is as much a negative state as nirvana. Emancipation from or extinction of the bondage of flesh leads to ananda, eternal bliss. Let me close this part of the argument by drawing attention to the fact that the final words of the Brahma Vidya is not neti. The poet has come to the conclusion that non-cooperation is not dignified enough for the India of his vision, that it's a doctrine of negation, separation, narrowness and despair. I shall endeavor in all humility to answer the poet's doubts. I may fail to convince him and the readers who might have been touched by his eloquence, but I would like to assure him and India that non-cooperation in conception is not any of the things that he fears, and that he need have no cause to be ashamed of his country for having adopted non-cooperation. Non-cooperation may have come in advance of its time. The world must then wait.
I do not say for a moment that we should belittle the work immediately to hand. But when the bird is roused by the dawn, its awakening is not absorbed altogether in its search for food. Its wings respond unwearily to the call of the sky. Its throat pours forth song for joy of new light. Universal humanity has sent us its call today. We must respond. Response is the only true sign of life.
True to his poetic instinct, the poet lives for the morrow and would have us do likewise. He presents to our admiring gaze the beautiful picture of the birds early in the morning singing hymns of praise as they soar into the sky. These birds had their day's food and soared with rested wings, in whose veins new blood streamed through the previous night. But I have had the pain of watching birds who, for want of strength, could not be coaxed even to their wings. The human bird under the Indian sky wakes up weaker than when he pretended to retire. For millions, it's an eternal vigil or an eternal trance. The hungry millions ask for just one poem, invigorating food. It cannot be given to them. They must earn it. And they can only earn it by the sweat of their brow. If we take care of today, God will take care of tomorrow.
And so on. They used imagery for arguments and played upon each other's images to press home a point, a political debate on a poetic plane. The difference in philosophical positions on non-cooperation remained.
The reason for my refusing to advise students to leave their schools, it is because the mere anarchy of a mere emptiness never tempts me, even when it is resorted to as a temporary measure. I could not lightly take upon myself the tremendous responsibility of a mere negative program for them, which would uproot their life from its soil, however thin and poor that soil might be. What irony of fate is this, that I should be preaching cooperation of cultures between the East and the West on one side of the ocean, when the doctrine of non-cooperation is preached on the other side. I do not believe in the material civilization of the West, just as I do not believe in the physical body to be the highest truth in man. But I still believe in the true meeting of the East and the West.
I hope I am as great a believer in free air as the great poet. I do not want my house to be walled on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. The poet's concern is largely about the students. He is of the opinion that they should not have been called upon to give up government schools without having other schools to go to. I must differ with him here. I have never been able to make a fetish of literary training. My experience has proved to my satisfaction that literary training by itself adds not an inch to one's moral height, and that character building is independent of literary training. I am firmly of the opinion that the government schools have unmanned us. They have rendered us helpless and godless. They have filled us with discontent, and with no remedy for discontent have made us despondent. They have made us what we were intended to become, clerks and interpreters.
Tagore acknowledged readily the loftiness of Mahatma's point of view as well as the principled position taken. He wrote, "Previously, the vision of our political leaders had never reached beyond the English-knowing classes because the country meant for them only that bookish aspect of it which is to be found in the Englishman's history."
Here was the truth at last, not a mere quotation out of a book. So the name of Mahatma, which was given to him, is his true name. Who else has felt so many men of India to be his own flesh and blood?
But his own point of view also merited assertion.
But if, having seen the truth, our belief in it is not confirmed, what is the good of it all? Our mind must acknowledge the truth of intellect just as our heart does the truth of love. Today, in the atmosphere of the country, there is a spirit of persecution which is not that of armed force, but something still more alarming because it is invisible. I find further that those who had their doubts as to the present activities, if they happen to whisper them out, however cautiously, however guardedly, feel some admonishing hand clutching them within. There was a newspaper which one day had the temerity to disapprove, in a feeble way, of the burning of cloth. The very next day, the editor was shaken out of his balance by the agitation of his readers.
How long would it take for the fire that was burning cloth to reduce his paper to ashes? The sight that meets my eye is on one hand people immensely busy, on the other intensely afraid. What I hear on every side is that reason and culture as well must be closured. It is only necessary to cling to an unquestioning obedience.
Obedience? To whom? To some mantra, some unreasoned creed?
The Bard of Shantiniketan, in a brilliant essay on the present movement, presents a series of word pictures which he alone can paint. It's an eloquent protest against authority, slave mentality, or whatever description one might give of the blind acceptance of a passing mania whether out of fear or hope. The poet tells us summarily to reject anything that does not appeal to our heart or reason. With all this, one must heartily agree, and the poet deserves the thanks of his countrymen for standing up for truth and reason. I would feel extremely sorry to discover that the country had unthinkingly or blindly followed all that I had said or done. I am quite conscious of the fact that blind surrender to love is often far more mischievous than the forced surrender to the lash of the tyrant. There is hope for the slave of the brute, none for that of love. But whilst I agree with all that the poet has said as of the necessity of watchfulness, lest we cease to think, I must not be understood to endorse the proposition that there is any such large-scale blind acceptance in the country today.
From our master, the Mahatma, we must learn the truth of love in all its purity. But the science and art of building up Swaraj is a vast subject. For that task, there must be aspiration and emotion, but no less must study and thought be there likewise. For that, the economist must think, the mechanic must labor, the educationist and statesman must teach and contrive. In a word, the mind of the country must exert itself in all directions. And above all, the spirit of inquiry throughout the whole country must be kept intact and untrammeled, its mind not made timid or inactive by compulsion, open or secret. God has given the Mahatma the voice that can call, for in him there is truth. Why should this not be our long-awaited opportunity? But his call is in one narrow field alone. To one and all, he simply says, spin and weave, spin and weave. Is this the call of new age to new creation? When nature gave its call to the bee to seek refuge in the narrow life of the hive, millions of bees responded for the sake of efficiency and accepted the loss of sex in consequence. Any country, the people of which can agree to become neuters for the sake of some temptation or command, carries within itself its own prison house. To spin is easy, and therefore, for all men, it is an imposition hard to bear. The mind is no less valuable than cotton thread. Consider the burning of cloth heaped up before the very eyes of our motherland, shivering and ashamed in her nakedness. What is the nature of the call to do this? The question of using or refusing cloth of a particular manufacturer belongs mainly to economic science. The discussion of this matter by our countrymen should have been in the language of economics.
I must confess that I do not draw a sharp or any distinction between economics and ethics. Economics that hurt the moral well-being of an individual or a nation are immoral and therefore sinful. Thus, the economics that permit one country to prey upon another are immoral. It is sinful for me to wear the latest finery of Regent Street when I know that if I had but worn the cloth spun by my neighboring spinners and weavers would have clothed me and fed and clothed them. On the knowledge of my sin bursting upon me, I must consign these foreign garments to the flames and thenceforth rest content with the rough khadi spun by my neighbors. On knowing that my neighbors, having given up the occupation, may not take kindly to the spinning wheel, I must take it upon myself and thus make it popular.
Charlie Andrews, a friend of both, was worried. Would such differences drive these two noble souls apart? Taking a cautious step, he arranged a meeting between them at Doordarshan, Tagore's ancestral home in Kolkata. Only the three of them were present, and neither Gandhi nor Tagore issued any statements to the press. Many years later, Tagore narrated the happenings of that meeting to Leonard Elmhurst.
Gandhiji came to visit me at my home in Doordarshan in Calcutta. He wanted very much to win my support for one or the other of the various planks of his political program.
Gurudev, You were yourself a leader and promoter of the Swadeshi movement in India over 20 years ago. You wanted Indians to stand up as Indians and not to be poor copies of Englishmen. My Swaraj movement is the natural child of your Swadeshi. You should join me and strengthen it.
Gandhi ji, why must we be like the rest of the world, suffering from a cult of selfish and short-sighted nationalism? India has always offered hospitality to all nations and creeds. I have come to believe that we in India still have a lot to learn from the West and its science, and we must, through education, learn to collaborate among ourselves.
We've already achieved Hindu-Muslim unity, Gurudev.
I do not agree. You have only introduced it on the political platform, where Muslim and Hindu happily hold a whip together to crack it at the British. I have no love for British officialdom, but can you really say that you have a genuine friendship with the Muslims deep in your hearts? When the British either walk out or are driven out, what will happen then?
Gurudev, the whole movement is based on the principle of non-violence, and that's why, as a poet who believes in peace, you should join my movement and work for it.
Come here, Gandhiji. Look over the edge of this veranda. Look down there and see what your non-violent followers are up to. They've stolen cloth from the shops on Chitpur Road. They've lit that bonfire in my courtyard and are now howling round it like a pack of demented jackals. Is that non-violence? As you surely know yourself, we are a very emotional people. Can you keep these emotions under strict control with your non-violent principles? You know you can't, Gandhiji. Only by educating their children together for 2 or 3 generations will you eventually overcome the hostility that exists between Hindu and Muslim.
Gurudev, you say you believe in education, the education of Indians by Indians. My movement too is about education, a national system of education. Today, thousands of students and teachers are leaving these government and missionary schools and enlisting in these new schools.
Yes, and you first pick out the best of them to enlist in your political program. And the most stupid are allowed to stay behind and open schools of a kind that offer a travesty of education, not the real thing. Is that your national education plan? India should today be inviting teachers and professors from all over the world to come and teach in India and also to learn from our own cultural heritage. This is what I'm now trying to do at Shantiniketan.
If you cannot do much for us, may I ask for a simpler service? You could put the young Bhadralok with their Calcutta degrees to shame by asking them to sit down and spin. You could lead the whole nation by spinning yourself.
Poems I can spin, songs I can spin. But what a mess I would make, Gandhiji, of your precious cotton.
A brief and diplomatic statement was issued by Andrews. They had a difference of temperament so wide that it was very difficult to arrive at a common intellectual understanding, though the moral ties of friendship remain entirely unbroken. In early 1922, Gandhi was arrested and imprisoned. For almost 2 years, the national movement came to a standstill. Naturally, the exchange between the two was also interrupted. Gandhi was released in 1924. Among the first to greet him was Tagore, first by a telegram.
We rejoice.
And then by a letter. Dear Gandhiji, I do not want to dwell upon my joy at the fact of your freedom from imprisonment, but I cannot remain silent and inactive when I feel great anxiety at the unbounded prospect of freedom that others have in wrecking your health and peace of mind. All I can do to serve you in this crisis is to send Charlie to keep you company and help you as only he knows how to do. With love, this was at a personal level. I'm not ashamed to admit that the depths of my mind have not been moved by the Charkha agitation. I find that where hands are reluctant to work the spindle, mouths are all the more busy spinning its praise.
We have had our experience of this in the tremendous exaltation produced by the imaginary easy prospect of Hindu-Muslim unity. And therefore, I am afraid of a blind faith on a very large scale in the charkha. More so in a country which is so liable to succumb to the lure of shortcuts when pointed out by a personality about whose moral earnestness there can be no doubt. Our country is a land of rites and ceremonies, so that we have more faith in worshipping the feet of the priest than the divinity whom he serves. Only to such a country can come the charkha as the emblem of her deliverance, and the people, dazed into obedience by some specious temptation, carry on turning the charkha in the seclusion of their corners, dreaming all the while that the car of Swaraj rolls onward in triumphal progress at every turn of their wheel. The discussion so far has proceeded on the assumption that the large-scale production of homespun thread and cloth will result in the alleviation of the country's poverty. That is, after all, a gratuitous assumption. Those who know have expressed grave doubt on this point. It is better for an ignoramus like myself to refrain from entering into this controversy. My complaint is that by the promulgation of this confusion between Swaraj and Charkha, the mind of the country is being distracted from Swaraj to give the Charkha the first place in our striving for the alleviation of our country's poverty. Is only a way to make our insulted intelligence recoil in despairing inaction. Heaps of thread and piles of cloth do not constitute the subject for a great picture of human welfare. The village in which people come together to earn for themselves their health, their education, their shelter, to gain for themselves the joy of so doing, will be the village to light the lamp on the way to Swaraj. It will not be difficult, therefore, to light other lamps one after another, thus illuminating more and more of the path along which Swaraj will advance, not propelled by the mechanical revolution of the charkha, but by the process of its own organic growth. It is extremely distasteful for me to have to disagree with Mahatma Gandhi with regard to any matter of method or principle. What could be of greater joy than to join hands in the field with one for whom one has such love and reverence? Nothing is more wonderful to me than Mahatma Ji's great moral personality. How often has my personal feeling of regard strongly urged me to accept at Mahatma Gandhi's hands my own enlistment as a follower of the Charkha cult?
But as often has my reason and conscience restrained me, lest I should be a party to the raising of the Charkha to a higher plane than is its due, thereby distracting attention from the other more important factors in our task.
When Sir Rabindranath's criticism of the Charkha was published some time ago, several friends asked me to reply to it. His criticism has not displeased me. Why should a mere disagreement with my views displease? On the contrary, frank criticism pleases me, for our friendship becomes all the richer for our disagreements. I am obliged to make these prefatory remarks as Dame Rumour has whispered that jealousy is at the root of all that criticism. Such baseless suspicion displays an atmosphere of weakness and intolerance. Of what should the poet be jealous in me? Jealousy presupposes the possibility of a rivalry. Well, I have never succeeded in writing a single rhyme in my life. There is nothing of the poet about me. I cannot aspire after his greatness. The world today does not possess his equal. The poet makes his gopis dance to the tune of his flute. while I wander after my charkha, the Sita I call her, and seek to deliver her from the 10-headed monster of Manchester, Paris, etc. He's an inventor. He creates, destroys and recreates. I'm an explorer, and having discovered something, I must cling to it. Thus, there is no competition between us. I must say in all humility that we complement each the other's activities. The poet does not read Young India. He has no need to. He is not expected to. Therefore, all that he knows of the movement is from table talk, and he has denounced what he has imagined to be the excesses of charkha. Around the charkha, that is amidst the people who have shed their idleness and who have understood the value of cooperation, a national servant would build up an anti-malaria campaign, conservation, settlement of village disputes and hundreds of other beneficial activities. Wherever charkha work is fairly established, all such ameliorative activity is going on according to the capacity of the villagers and workers involved. The merits I have claimed for charkha remain undamaged by the poet's battery. If I adore the poet, as he knows I do, it is in spite of the differences between us.
While the debate raged, Gandhi's reference to Tagore as Sir stirred up a hornet's nest. Following the traumatic massacre of innocents in the Jallianwala Bagh episode 7 years earlier, the poet had asked the Viceroy to relieve him of his title. Many tongues wagged, and there were many loud whispers as it was taken as sarcasm not befitting the Mahatma. Gandhi wrote to Vidushekhar Shastri, a leading member of faculty at Vishwa Bharati. December 21, 1925. Dear Shastri Mahashay, I had Ramanand Babu's article in the Modern Review on the charkha read out to me. I must own that it has deeply pained me. I know that he is too good to willfully misunderstand anybody. It is my misfortune that what I thought I had written with the purest motives should be understood as being otherwise written even by men like him. I cannot pardon myself if even Gurudev so understood my article. I can but explain my position and ask every friend in Shantiniketan to accept my explanation.
Gurudev's title was not used in ignorance. I know that he had not renounced the title but had asked to be relieved of it. He was not so relieved. And Andrews and I had a discussion over it, and we came to the conclusion that the title not having been taken away, we Gurudev's friends should make no fuss about it. We also felt it might be courtesy to make use of the title now and then. I know what poison has been emitted over these boycotts. I have therefore gone out of my way to describe title personages by their titles in order to show that the use of titles was no crime. Lastly, pray believe me when I tell you I wrote that article in no unfriendly, unloving or critical spirit. I wrote it to disarm criticism and to testify that my differences with him could not possibly diminish my regard and affection for him. So please, all of you, consider me to be one of you, incapable of misunderstanding the poet or his mission. I must not be deserted or misunderstood by you. Do please ask Ramanand Babu to let me have a line to say that he understands my explanation, and would you please get an assurance from the poet that he at least did not misunderstand me? You may share this with anyone you like. Yours with love, MKG.
Dear Mahatma Ji, I have seen the letter you have written to our Shastri Mahashay. It is full of your noble spirit. You have my assurance that even if you ever hit me hard in the cause of what you think as truth, our personal relationships based upon mutual respect will bear that strain and will remain uninjured. With Namaskar.
January 18, 1930, the two met at Sabarmati Ashram. They had an animated discussion on various issues. Tagore had a cold. The signs of strain, exhaustion and of old age were quite visible on his countenance.
I am 70 now, Mahatma Ji, and so am considerably older than you.
But when an old wanderer of 60 can barely walk, a young poet of 70 can dance.
That is true, that is true. You are getting ready for another arrest cure. I wish they would give me one.
But you do not behave yourself, Gurudev.
Allow me to ask, what are your specific plans for the country? If you make the announcement that we shall seek complete freedom and if you do not have any program to offer, would it not destroy our credibility?
Gurudev, I'm thinking about this furiously night and day, but I do not see the light coming out of this surrounding darkness. But even if we could not think of an effective program, we could not possibly hesitate to declare the country's objective, which could only mean full independence. The dominion status means what we have never understood it to mean.
We must know that we have not lost our country. At present, it is an illusion to believe that the country is ours. Let us begin with that confidence and with a firm belief that to own our country is our right. When I left America, I had thought you would create a complete service-oriented organization of our own country in which everyone can contribute according to their own capacity. If you will entrust me with education, I will be too happy to render my services. We must find out the strength lying dormant in the country and employ it. We need a person who enjoys the confidence of the people. You do. In my opinion, that is a real program for freedom. First, announce that we are free. We shall then look after our own affairs and try to help our nation.
Gurudev, I'm indeed thinking of building such an organization fit for our people. I do not believe that I have lost my control, not for a moment. Perhaps I have more control now, but I have nothing to offer. Today we do not have adequate resources to run our educational institutions. I have nothing to attract you with, and I would not like to misuse your name.
Our first priority must be a program acceptable to the entire nation.
You do not have it today, but you will find it soon enough.
Another matter. I merely pronounce my thoughts as they come to me. When I had disagreed with your non-cooperation, I had said that cooperation must be sought with whomsoever possible. We must tell everyone to work for the country according to their own unique strengths. We should forget that we are under a foreign rule. We must work for our nation because it is ours by right.
A note of optimism, and the two parted. Soon after Gandhi found his program, it was to defy the Salt Act. He marched to Dandi in March 1930 after Tagore had already left for Europe. Gandhi never returned to Ahmedabad, and Tagore did not visit the city again. In Germany, Tagore saw a passion play based on the last days of the Christ's life. Soon after, almost overnight, he wrote a poem directly in English and called it The Child. It begins, "What of the night?" they ask. No answer comes, for the blind, time gropes in a maze and knows not its path or purpose. The darkness in the valley stares like the dead eye sockets of a giant. The clouds, like a nightmare, oppress the sky, and the massive shadows lie scattered like the torn limbs of the night. The images build up. A lost land, its people in agony, rendered directionless, awaiting a savior. The full poem has 10 stanzas, rich in imagery. The women weep and wail, they cry that their children are lost in the wilderness of contrary paths with confusion at the end. Others defiantly ribald shake with raucous laughter, the lascivious limbs unshrinkingly loud, for they think that nothing matters.
There on the crest of the hill stands the man of faith. Amid snow-white silence he scans the sky for some signal of light. And when the clouds thicken and the night birds scream as they fly, he cries, "Brothers, despair not, for man is great." But they never heed him, for they believe the elemental brute is eternal and goodness in its depth, darkly cunning with deception. When beaten and wounded, they cry out, "Brother, where art thou?" The answer comes, "I am by your side." But they cannot see in the dark, and they argue that the voice is that of their own desperate desire, that men are ever condemned to fight for phantoms in an interminable desert of mutual menace.
A long poem written in one stretch, the image is hurtling to a climax. Someone from the crowd suddenly stands up and, pointing to the leader with a merciless finger, breaks out, "False prophet, thou hast deceived us." Others take up the cry one by one. Women hiss their hatred and men growl. At last, one bolder than others suddenly deals him a blow. They cannot see his face but fall upon him in a fury of destruction and hit him till he lies prone upon the ground, his life extinct. The night is still. The sound of the distant waterfall comes muffled, and a faint breath of jasmine floats in the air.
The women sob out loud and the men hide their faces in their hands. A few try to slink away unnoticed, but their crime keeps them chained to their victim. They ask each other in bewilderment, who will show us the path? The old man from the east bends his head and says, "The victim." They sit still and silent. Again speaks the old man. "We refused him in doubt, we killed him in anger. We will now accept him in love, for in his death he lives in the life of us all. The great victim."
And they all stand and mingle their voices and sing,
"Victory to the victim."
Pardon me, Gurudev, a question. How in the world did you predict the end I was to meet?
The reply might well have been the words of another poet writing about Tagore 75 years later. A poem by William Radici has Gurudev engaged in an imaginary conversation in which he says,
"Keep on, keep trying, I did no more. I merely made to love and adore images of my seeking. Poems of beauty, songs of joy, rhymes for the learning girl or boy, questions, never replies. Don't worry if you don't know me yet when all solutions have been met. That day, my spirit dies."
As tempting as it might be to extend this detour into the realm of poetic image making, we must return to the realm of hard political reality.
it was late 1930 and Gandhi had declined an invitation to the first roundtable conference. It was a principal decision as his conditions had not been accepted.
The invitation to a round-table conference accorded to the representatives of a people who can with perfect impunity be throttled into silence or trampled into pulp is in itself a sign of the times undreamt of half a century ago. Mahatma Gandhi may not believe in the success of its obvious purpose, but he must acknowledge that it represents the same moral principles which he himself invokes on behalf of his countrymen in their endeavor after self-government. The real importance of this conference is not in the opportunity it may offer of a cooperation with British politicians, but with the sole force of the whole world. We must know that this conference is going to hold its sittings before the World Tribunal whose approbation it is eager to win. This gesture is inspired not merely by political necessity, but the necessity of a world sanction. It would have been worthy of Mahatma Gandhi if he had accepted unhesitatingly the seat offered to him.
The British agenda was to create separate electorates in India based on religious identities, which would also have geographical separations. Thus, Bengal would be divided into an eastern sector with a Muslim majority, while the western sector would have a Hindu identity. Tagore saw this as a short-sighted move with grave long-term consequences. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, on the other hand, saw this as an opportunity for the lowest castes of the Hindus, the Harijans as Gandhi called them, to assert themselves and seek a separate electorate. The Harijans were not Hindus, he argued, as the Hindu majority had never accepted them as their own. Gandhi naturally was deeply hurt and he threatened a nationwide agitation to go on an indefinite fast. In September 1932, Gandhi was imprisoned without a trial in Pune. A disturbed Tagore sent him a telegram.
It is worth sacrificing precious life for the sake of India's unity and her integrity. Stop. Though we cannot anticipate what effect it may have upon our rulers, who may not understand its immense importance for our people, we feel certain that the supreme appeal of such self-offering to the conscience of our countrymen will not be in vain. Stop. I fervently hope that we will not callously allow such a national tragedy to reach its extreme length. Stop. Our sorrowing hearts will follow your sublime penance. Stop. With reverence and love.
At about the same time, Tagore was very much in the thoughts of Gandhi. Even as the telegram was on its way, he was composing a letter to Tagore.
Dear Gurudev, it is the early morning in 3 o'clock of Tuesday. I enter the fiery gates at noon. If you can bless the effort, I want it. You have been to me a true friend because you have been a candid friend, often speaking your thoughts aloud. I had looked forward to a firm opinion from you, one way or the other, but you have refused to criticize. Though it can only be now during my fast, I will yet prize your criticism if your heart condemns my action. I am not too proud to make an open confession of my blunder, whatever the cost of confession, if I find myself in error. If you can bless the effort, I want it. It will sustain me. I hope I have made myself clear. With love. Just as I was handing this letter over to the superintendent, I got your loving and magnificent wire. It will sustain me in the storm I am about to enter.
And on the very next day, the poet had written an essay for the general public to explain the true meaning of the fast. Let us try to understand the meaning of his message. From the beginning of human history, there has continued the cleavage between classes, those favored by circumstances, exploiting the weakness of others and building the stronghold of their own pride of superiority upon the humiliation of a larger section of the community. Though this practice has been prevalent for long, yet we must assert that it is against the true spirit of man.
We on our part in India have banished a considerable number of our own people into a narrow enclosure of insult, branding them with a sign of permanent degradation. A dungeon does not solely consist of brick and mortar confinement, but setting narrow limits to a man's self-respect is a moral prison more cruel for victims than the physical one, and more immoralizing for those who encourage it passively or with pious fervor. The concrete fact of inequalities between races and individuals cannot be ignored, but to accept it as absolute and utilize it to deprive men of their human rights and comradeship is a social crime that multiplies fast in its heinousness. Against that deep-seated moral weakness in our society, Mahatma Ji has pronounced his ultimatum, and though it may be our misfortune to lose him in the battlefield, the fight will be passed on to every one of us, to be carried on to the final end.
Within days, there was a deterioration in Gandhi's health. Greatly concerned, Tagore left Shantiniketan to Pune.
We left for Pune with hope in our hearts, but the atmosphere was tense with foreboding. My companions bought newspapers at every big railway stall. The news was not very encouraging. Mahatma Ji, according to his physicians, had definitely entered the danger zone, and yet Mahatma Ji had indeed triumphed, curbing intense physical agony and mental strain with an unbending will. Wavering between hope and fear, we reached Kalyan on the morning of September 26. Without delay, we set out for Pune by the car which our hostess there had sent for us. Entering the city of Pune, we found armored cars and machine guns being maneuvered on military grounds. Soldiers paraded along city roads. Entering the home of our hostess, I sensed anxiety in the air. There was a shadow of suspense on every face. On questioning, I learned that Mahatma Ji's condition was precarious. It was his day of silence. He had expressed a desire that I should be with him when he broke his silence at 1 o'clock. On our way to the Yaravada prison at some distance from the gate, our car was stopped. A sentry on duty had been told not to allow any car to pass till further orders. I had thought that nowadays in India, the road to the jail entrance was wide open. As a gentleman from our side proceeded to obtain sanction from the prison authorities, Sriman Devdas came along in a car, the jail permit in his hand. Later on, I heard that Mahatma Ji had suddenly felt that our car had been obstructed, though he had no information on that, and had sent his son to fetch us. Big iron doors swung wide open one after the other and closed behind us. To our front was the arrogance of high walls, a fettered sky, straight-cut metal road projecting ahead, a few trees. Two major events in my life have come rather late. Only recently I'd crossed the threshold of a university, and in spite of a slight obstruction, here was I today inside a regular prison house.
The master storyteller in him was not to be throttled by the grimness of the real-life situation.
In the middle courtyard, under the thick shade of a young mango tree, lay Mahatma Ji in his bed. He drew me near to himself. I praised my luck for having come on the crest of good news. It was nearly 1:30. One hears that the information had come to official Pune at 10 a.m. One felt surprised at the cruelly tortuous length of red tape. On all sides were friends. I recognized among them Mahadev, Vallabhbhai, Raja Gopalchari, Rajendra Prasad, Srimati Kasturi Bai and Sarojini, as well as Jawaharlal's wife, Kamala. Mahatma Ji's slender body was emaciated to a degree. His voice was barely audible. The responsibility of his physicians was grave, and yet his inner vigor was undiminished, his intellect intact, and his radiant personality as ever tireless. I could hardly believe the strength in this frail man had I not come near to him like this. Today, to millions of hearts across India, has reached the message of this immortal spirit resting in the shadow of death's altar. In groups, men and women clad in white khaddar quietly held discussions. Noticeable was the disciplined calm of this gathering inside the jail. At last, with the government's red-sealed envelope in hand, appeared the Inspector General of Prison. When he had finished reading, Mahatma Ji called his friends to discuss the communication. One understood that it did not go against Mahatma Ji's wishes. The great penance of the fast was now over. Srimati Kamala Nehru prepared the lemon juice. According to the request of the Inspector General of Prison, it was to be given to Mahatma Ji by Srimati Kasturibai. Mahadev told me that my Gitanjali song, Where the Heart is Dried and Parched Up, was a favorite of Mahatma Ji's. I had forgotten the tune which I once gave it. I sang it to an improvised tune. Then Pandit Shyam Sastri read out from the Vedas. Srimati Kasturibai handed to Mahatma Ji the glass of fruit juice, which he took and slowly sipped. And the members of Sabarmati Ashram and the others sang in chorus the hymn, Vaishnav Jan. Inside jail barricades, this great festival took place. Never had happened such an event in human history. A sacrificial yajna was begun inside the prison, and it had reached its great fulfillment.
A period of intense anxiety for all ended on a peaceful note. Gandhi remarked later,
Gurudev, did you know by singing that song on that day you were setting a precedence? Subsequently, that song was sung whenever I broke my fast.
Mahatma Ji, our people are wonderstruck at the impossible being made possible in these few days. There is a universal feeling of immense relief at your being saved for us. Now is the opportune moment when a definite command from you will rouse the Hindu community to make a desperate effort to win over the Mohammedans to a common cause. It is more difficult of success than your fight against untouchability, for there is deep-rooted antipathy against the Muslims in most of our people, and they also have not much love for ourselves. With reverent love, I am, ever yours, Rabindranath Tagore.
Dear Gurudev, I have your beautiful letter. I am daily seeking the light. This unity between Hindus and Muslims is also my life's mission. The restrictions too hamper me, but I know that when I have the light, it will pierce through the restrictions. Meanwhile, I pray, though I do not yet fast. With love, yours. I was so thrilled by the love showered by the poet that I wrote to Charlie. Gurudev is still at it. That little fast brought me many treasures. Gurudev was the richest find. If someone had said, fast unto find Gurudev, I should have done so without a second thought. I was dying to find a corner in his heart. Thank God I found it through the fast.
the Pune Pact. The whole nation was greatly relieved that Gandhi had ended his fast. Baba Saheb Ambedkar was under tremendous pressure to save the life of Mahatma Gandhi. A compromise was reached between the leaders of caste Hindus and Ambedkar, and the Pune Pact was signed. Tagore was one among many who went out of his way to have an agreement in place to save Gandhi's life. This was a compromise that he regretted later. He felt that the Pune Pact was unjust for Bengal as it would cause irreparable damage to Hindu-Muslim relations.
I had to issue a press statement. I remember to have sent a cable to the Prime Minister not to delay in accepting the proposal about communal awards sent to him by Mr. Gandhi. At that moment, a situation existed which was extremely painful, not affording us the least time or peace of mind to think quietly on the possible consequences of the Pune Pact, which had already been arrived at in the conference, in which no responsible representatives of Bengal took part. It was a commitment which I now realize as a mistake from the point of view of our country's permanent interest. That Indian members of the conference belonging to provinces different from ours should not only be apathetic but actively take part in Bengal's misfortune is terribly ominous, presaging no good for our future history.
Dear Gurudev, I have read your press message regarding the pact insofar as it applies to Bengal. It has caused me deep grief to find that you were misled by a very deep affection for me and by your confidence in my judgment into approving of a pact which was discovered to have done a grave injustice to Bengal. But I am not at all convinced that there was any error made. I applied my mind to it, discussed it with friends who ought to know, and I was satisfied that there was no injustice done to Bengal. If I felt convinced that there was an error of judgment, I would strain every nerve to see that the error was rectified. Yours very sincerely.
Dear Mahatma Ji, I am fully convinced that if the Pune Pact is accepted without modification, it will be a source of perpetual communal jealousy, leading to constant disturbance of peace and a fatal break in the spirit of mutual cooperation in our province. With reverence and love.
Another letter a few days later, the last on the subject.
Dear Mahatma Ji, at this unhappy moment, I am sure you need complete rest after the strenuous days of mental and physical strain.
I do not wish to trouble you with any detailed discussion of the Pune Pact. You are satisfied that there was no injustice done to Bengal. I wish I could accept your words and remain silently contented about it. But it has become impossible for me, knowing for certain that the communal award advocated by the pact, if it remains unaltered, will inflict a serious injury upon the social and political life in Bengal.
Justice is an important aspect of truth, and if it is allowed to be violated for the sake of immediate peace or speedy cutting of some political knots, in the long run it is sure to come back to those who are apparently benefited by it and will claim a heavy price for the concession cheaply gained.
Was it the politics of humanity or the humanity of politics? In 1933, Gandhi decided to fast for 21 days once again in Pune. This time it was in protest against the Orthodox Hindus in the Guruvayur temple in Kerala, who discriminated against the lower castes of Hindus in entering the temple and worshipping there. Gandhi called it a penance for self-purification.
Dear Gurudev, it is now 1:45 a.m. I think of you and some other friends. If your heart endorses contemplated fast, I want your blessings again. My love and respects, yours.
It is not unlikely that you are mistaken about the imperative necessity of your present vow. And when we realize there is a grave risk of its fatal termination, we shudder at the possibility of this tremendous mistake never having the opportunity of being rectified. I cannot help beseeching you not to offer such an ultimatum of mortification to God for His scheme of things. With love and reverence, yours. The logical consequence of your example, if followed, will be an elimination of all noble souls from the world, leaving the morally feeble and the downtrodden multitude to sink into the fathomless depth of ignorance and iniquity. You have no right to say that this process of penance can only be efficacious by your own individual endeavor, and for others it holds no meaning. If that were true, you ought to have performed it in absolute secrecy as a special mystic rite that claims its one sacrifice, beginning and ending with yourself. The suffering that has been caused to me by the vow you have taken has compelled me to write to you thus, for I cannot bear the sight of a sublimely noble career, journeying towards a finality which to my mind lacks a perfectly satisfying justification. With deepest pain and love,
Tagore did not desire any further comment and declared the correspondence closed. In the wake of the great earthquake in 1934 in Bihar, he was compelled to write to Gandhi again.
The press reports that you, in a recent speech referring to the recent earthquake in Bihar, spoke as follows.
I want you to be superstitious enough to believe with me that the earthquake is a divine chastisement for the great sin we have committed against those whom we describe as Harijans.
I find it difficult to believe this. But if this be your real view on the matter, I do not think it should go unchallenged. Herewith, you'll find a rejoinder from me. If you are correctly reported in the press, will you kindly send it to the press? Mahatma Ji was gracious to publish my rejoinder in the Harijan. It has caused me painful surprise to find Mahatma Gandhi accusing those who blindly follow their own social custom of untouchability of having brought down God's vengeance upon certain parts of Bihar, evidently specially selected for his desolating displeasure. It is all the more unfortunate, for this kind of unscientific view of things is too readily accepted by most of our countrymen. I keenly feel the iniquity of it. I am compelled to utter a truism in asserting that physical catastrophes have their inevitable origin in certain combination of physical facts. What is truly tragic about it is the fact that the kind of argument that Mahatma Ji uses by invoking an event of cosmic disturbance far better suits the psychology of his opponents than his own. And it would not have surprised me at all if they had taken this opportunity of holding him and his followers responsible for the visitation of divine anger.
The part of Shanti Niketan is Gurudev for me, as he is for the residents of that great institution. But Gurudev and I early discovered certain differences, and it cannot suffer by Gurudev's latest utterance on my linking the Bihar calamity with the sin of untouchability. He had a perfect right to utter his protest when he believed that I was in error. My profound regard for him would make me listen to him more readily than any other critic. But in spite of having read his statement 3 times, I adhere to what I have written in these columns. I have long believed that physical phenomena produce results, both physical and spiritual. The converse I hold to be equally true. To me, the earthquake was no caprice of God, nor a result of meeting of mere blind forces. We do not know all the laws of gods or their workings. Visitations like droughts, floods, earthquake and the like, though they seem to have only physical origins, are for me somehow linked with man's morals. Even as I cannot help believing in God, though I am unable to prove his existence to the skeptics, in the like manner, I cannot prove the connection of the sin of untouchability with the Bihar visitation, even though the connection is instinctively felt by me.
And that was that. As he put it, the subject of God's will was in the realm of faith and had no need of debate. A year passed. Tagore was a year old, but had aged greatly in his institution building efforts at Shantiniketan. Who else could he turn to for understanding?
My dear Mahatma Ji, over 30 years I have practically given my all to this mission of my life. I faced all my difficulties unaided, and through my struggles, the institution grew up in its manifold aspects. I am 75 now, and I feel the burden of my responsibility growing too heavy for me. Constant begging excursions with absurdly meager results have added to my daily anxiety and have brought me to an extreme verge of exhaustion. I know of none else to relieve me of perpetual worry at this last period of my waning life and health. With deepest love.
Dear Gurudev, you may depend upon my straining every nerve to find the required money. I am groping. I am trying to find the way out. It will take me some time before I can report the results of my search to you. It is unthinkable that you should have to undertake a begging mission at your age. The necessary funds must come to you without your having to stir out of Shantiniketan. With reverential love, yours. A few months later, when Gurudev was in Delhi with his troop from Shantiniketan, I wrote, Dear Gurudev, God has blessed my poor effort and here is the money. May God keep you for many a year yet to come. Yours with love.
With it was a letter that read, Please find the enclosed draft for rupees 60,000, which we believe is the deficit on the expenses on Shantiniketan, which to cover you have been exhibiting your art from place to place. When we heard this, we felt humiliated. We believe that at your advanced age and in your weak state of health, you ought not to have to undertake these arduous tours. You are not only the greatest poet of India, you are the poet of humanity. Your poems remind one of the hymns of the ancient rishis. For reasons which need not be stated, we prefer to remain anonymous.
Early in 1937, I wrote to him about Shantiniketan once more.
My dear Mahatma Ji, I have taken the liberty of nominating you as a life trustee of our Vishwa Bharati.
In these last frail years of my life, it will give me great consolation to know that the institution to which I have given the best part and energy of my life will have you as one of its guardians.
Gandhi was compelled to decline the invitation as he felt he could not do justice to the position. He also chided Tagore for his continued preoccupation with fundraising.
I understand that in spite of your promise to me in Delhi, you're about to go to Ahmedabad on a begging expedition. I was grieved, and I would ask you on bended knees to forego the expedition if it is really decided upon. In any case, I would beg of you to recall my appointment as one of the trustees, with love and reverence.
Not surprisingly, Tagore was hurt.
Allow me to be frank and to tell you that possibly your own temperament prevents you to understand the dignity of this mission, which I am glad to call my own. A mission not merely concerned with India's economic problems or a sectarian religions, but comprehending the culture of the human mind in its broadest sense. I expect not alms or favors, but grateful homage to my art from those who have sensitiveness of the soul to respond to it. I must refuse to accept the term begging expedition as an worthy or accurate expression coming from your pen. It is a part of a poet's religion to entertain in his life a solemn faith in his own function, to realize he's specially called to collaborate with his Creator in adding to the joy of existence.
I thought myself to be so near you that I could dare playfully to accuse you of a contemplated breach of promise. My motive was absolutely plain. I wanted, one way or the other, to wean you off another begging expedition, a phrase which you and I used often enough when you were in Delhi. I do hope that this letter will undo the grief caused to you. With deepest pain and love.
On September 10th, 1937, the poet was suddenly taken ill. He was in Kolkata, and when he returned to Shantiniketan, he fell unconscious. As the telegraph office was then closed, the staff sent a telephonic message to Kolkata at 1 o'clock in the night asking that doctors should be sent to Shantiniketan immediately. Dr. Sir Neel Ratan Sarkar left for Shantiniketan at 2 o'clock by car and reached there early in the morning. Tagore was unconscious for almost 62 hours and all hopes were given up. But once he regained consciousness, his recovery was rapid. As soon as he could speak, he wanted to write a poem or paint a picture. As writing a poem was very strenuous, he asked for his pigments and brushes. Within a few hours, he painted quite a large picture. The foreground was a dark and ill-defined vale of primitive forest. A warm flood of golden light broke through in the center, revealing a distant view on the other side. When he was told about Gandhi's anxious message inquiring about his health, he responded,
My dear Mahatma Ji, the first thing that welcomed me to this world of life after the period of stupor that I passed through was your message of affectionate anxiety. It was fully worth the cost of suffering, which were unremitting in their long persistence. With grateful love.
Dear Gurudev, I have here your precious letter. You have anticipated me. I wanted to write as soon as I received Sir Neil Ratan's last reassuring wire. But the right hand needs rest. I did not want to dictate, and the left hand works slow. This is merely to show you the love some of us bear for you in our hearts. I verily believe that the silent prayers of your many admirers have been heard and that you are still with us. Your living word is a guide and inspiration to thousands. May God keep you for many a year yet to come. With deep love.
Between 1938 and 1939, Tagore paid glorious tributes to Gandhi. An ascetic himself, he does not frown upon the joys of others, but works for the enlivening of their existence day and night. He exalts poverty in his own life, but no man in India has striven more assiduously than he for the material welfare of his people. A reformer, with the zeal of a revolutionary, he imposes severe restraints on the very passions he provokes.
He advises his followers to hate evil, not the evildoer. It sounds an impossible precept, but he has made it as true as it can be made in his own life. Great as he is, as an organizer, as a politician, as a leader of men, as a social reformer, he is greater than all of these as a man, because none of these aspects or activities limit his humanity. Though an incorrigible idealist, given to referring all conduct to certain pet formulae of his own, he is essentially a lover of men and not of mere ideas. If he proposes an experiment for society, he must first subject himself to its ordeals. If he calls for a sacrifice, he must first pay its price himself. This man seems greater than all his virtues, great as they are.
His emphasis on the truth and purity of means from which he has evolved his creed of non-violence is but another aspect of his deep and insistent humanity. He will always be remembered as one who made his life a lesson for all ages to come, a moving tribute, wholly authentic, and finally, an admission. I must confess that I do not always see eye to eye with Gandhiji, by which I mean that had I been endowed with his force of character, my scheme of work would have been different.
Though I may have the imagination to conceive, I have not the power to carry out. Only a few men in this world have the power. And since our country has had the good fortune of giving birth to such a man, the way should be kept clear for his progress. I certainly would never think of impeding it.
In 1940, Gandhi visited Shantiniketan. A reception was held on the afternoon of his arrival. It was held at Amrakunj, a spot rendered sacred by its association to the late Maharshi Debendranath, Gurudev's father. The meeting commenced with the chanting of the poet's favorite text from the Upanishads. Those who come to know him, they attain immortality.
Just at this moment, there are problems that darken our destiny. These we know are crowding your path, and none of us is free from their attack. Let us for a moment pass beyond the bounds of this turmoil and make our meeting today a simple meeting of hearts. whose memory will remain when all the moral confusions of our distracted politics are allayed, and the eternal value of our true endeavor will be revealed.
I have come here leaving behind all the cares and burdens of politics simply to have Gurudev's darshan and blessings. I have often claimed myself to be an accomplished beggar, but a more precious gift has not fallen into this beggar's bowl than to have received Gurudev's blessings. I know that I have his blessings always, but to have received them from him in person has been a privilege, and that fills me with joy.
Just as Gandhi was taking his leave, Tagore handed him a letter.
And now, before you take your leave from Shantiniketan, allow me to make my fervent appeal. Accept this institution under your protection, giving it an assurance of permanence if you consider it to be a national asset. Vishwa Bharati is like the vessel carrying the cargo of my life's best treasures, and I hope it may claim special care from my countrymen for its preservation.
Gurudev, you may depend on my doing all I can in the common endeavor to ensure its permanence. Now, I look to you to keep your promise to sleep religiously for an hour daily during the day. Though I have regarded Shantiniketan as my second home, this visit has brought me closer to it than ever before.
In 1941, Tagore turned 80.
The World War was ready to enter its third year.
At a function organized to celebrate his birthday, his essay on the crisis in civilization was read out on his behalf. The wheels of fate will someday compel the English to leave their Indian empire. But what kind of India will they leave behind? What stark misery!
When the stream of their administration of centuries runs dry at last, what a waste of mud and filth they will leave behind them. I had at one time believed that the springs of civilization would issue out of the heart of Europe.
But today, when I'm about to quit the world, that faith has gone bankrupt altogether. And yet,
I shall not commit the grievous sin of losing faith in man.
a greeting by telegram was in order.
4 score not enough, may you finish 5.
Thanks message, but 4 score is impertinence. 5 score intolerable.
Did either of them know that this would be the last communication exchanged? Tagore breathed his last on August 7, 1941. As early as the January of 1929, Meera Behan, Madeline Slade, a disciple of Gandhi, wrote to Tagore after a visit to Shantiniketan. I now realize how Shantiniketan and Sabarmati are two fair daughters of the same great motherland, both with exquisite beauties of their own, different to look upon outwardly, but with that fundamental likeness that only daughters of the same parent can bear. Tagore replied in his inimitable style, human life has its two aspects. One is the discipline of truth, and the other is the fullness of expression.
Sabarmati represents that discipline of truth, for Mahatma Ji is born with the pure fire of truth. His nature is one with it. Being a poet, my mission is to inspire life's fullness of expression, and I hope Shantiniketan carries that ideal in all its activities. According to the Upanishad, the reconciliation of the contradiction between tapasya and ananda is at the root of creation. Mahatma Ji is the prophet of tapasya, and I am the poet of ananda.